Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in starting and growing your business. My guest this week is Emma Jones, one of the UK's best known champions of entrepreneurship. In fact, she's now the UK's Small Business Commissioner, leading efforts to tackle late payments and make life generally easier for Britain's small businesses, many of whom, of course, listen to this podcast. Now, Emma found her first business, TechLocate, during the dot-com boom, before going on to create Enterprise Nation in 2005. And over the following 2 decades, she built Enterprise Nation into a major small business support platform and community. There was so much ground to cover in this interview, from building and selling businesses to what she's learned from working with so many other entrepreneurs, as well as, of course, her current role. But as I discovered when I began our conversation, discovering exactly where Emma's entrepreneurial story starts wasn't quite as straightforward as I thought.
Well, Trevor, I love the fact you have started at the beginning, but you haven't quite started at the beginning, because I guess the beginning is childhood, which is probably what started me on the path to kind of then starting my own businesses, because I was brought up by a mum who ran restaurants. And so, yes, self-employment was in my background. And you don't know it at the time, but when you are brought up in a household where you understand that if the takings are good that day, that's a good sign. If customers aren't coming in, that's not a very good sign. And so, as I say, even though I kind of didn't realise it at the time, being brought up in a very entrepreneurial family, similarly kind of my mum's sisters, so kind of my aunties had all started their own businesses. I think that probably really helped me kind of get on the right road. But as you say, I joined Arthur Andersen out of university, so that was a proper job that I took on. I thought I was probably going to have a career of employment, but that came to an end probably about 5 years in from being at Anderson's.
Do you remember a moment that after 5 years where you thought, I think I want to go and do it a different way now?
Oh, I still remember that moment as if it was yesterday, because it wasn't just me that was doing it. It was, and in fact, this is why I look back on that moment and think, what an incredible time it was to start a business, because it was the dot-com revolution. You'll remember it, Trevor, and I was hugely inspired by this. Very positive media with so many stories of people who were coming up with ideas, raising money, changing the way in which industries worked. And so I was I'd joined Arthur Andersen in London, I'd moved to Leeds, but I was in the Manchester office by this time. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is incredible. It's such an entrepreneurial moment. And what I was doing for Anderson's was attracting inward investment into the UK, which actually was a process at the time that had quite a lot of friction in it. And so, yes, my first business, I set up with a co-founder, and I was hugely inspired by the fact that so many other people were doing the same. And that first business was what's referred to as a very quick flip. Because we started the company and pretty much less than 2 years later successfully sold that business. So yes, I was really inspired by the moment and the time, and maybe we'll talk about it, which is partly why kind of some years later, I was very honoured to be involved in a campaign called Startup Britain, where again, we kind of tried to create that moment and the environment where lots of people would say, well, actually, I'm seeing and watching lots of other people do this, maybe I can do it too.
Right. So that business you're referring to was TechLocate.
That's right.
So what was it that was thrilling? Okay, you looked around and we were in the middle of a sort of boom time. By the way, I should say I was editing a magazine at the time called Internet Business, which so I helped to foment a bit of the bubble, I'm afraid.
Excellent.
So it's partly my fault. But what did it teach you about building and running and then letting go of a business?
Well, really interesting question. And I've never been asked this question in that kind of way, but it taught me a lot, because in which case, if you were writing about it, Trevor, you will distinctly remember that most of the stories were around companies raising huge amounts of money. And so therefore, the thing it taught me, and it kind of goes back to that kind of childhood and being in the restaurant business, is when I first thought, okay, I really want to be a dot-com entrepreneur, I actually went to my boss at Anderson's and said, look, I'm going to leave. I want to start a dot-com company that works on the inward investment process. And he said, great, I'm going to introduce you to a corporate finance house. We're going to raise you loads of money and we're going to do what everyone's doing. So sure enough, I mean, I was, 27 at the time. So I kind of was like, okay, fine. I guess this is what you do. And we had help from a corporate finance firm. We wrote this massive, great big business plan, which I still have to this day, which essentially said, we're going to raise loads of money for this company, but we have no idea how we're going to pay this money back. And we took this to a venture capitalist. This was all happening in Manchester, because I was in Manchester when this was all starting. They said, yes, we're going to lend you the money. And I will never forget walking out of their office thinking, this doesn't feel right. Because in the restaurant trade, and of course we know this as consumers, you have to attract in customers, you have to give them a good service, they pay for it, and that's how you make your money. And I couldn't understand that somebody wanted to give us money when we didn't know how we were going to generate money to pay it back. So we actually refused the investment, and we did what I recommend and have since recommended over the decades, is that start your business on a bootstrap of a budget, go out hustling, go out selling, because it gives you confidence. And also it helps you understand what the business should do. So what I learned in that very quick period of the dot-com company was kind of almost be true to yourself, and don't necessarily be attracted by the big amounts of funding, especially if you don't know how you're going to pay it back. So I kind of brought myself back to business basics. And of course, when we sold that first business, that did as well, because our figures had always looked good. And it was the business itself was co-owned by two people. So it just made it easier to do a quick acquisition.
That's a fascinating answer. I mean, because I recognized early on that there were two types of people I was interviewing. There were the ones who you referred to who had just got the money but had no plan. And they're the bootstrappers like yourself, who were doing it the right way. And it was completely obvious, even in the middle of a boom, which ones were going to ultimately sort of stay around. So you were there, you sold it, you had a success in that. Startup Britain, as you said, but then you went on and founded Enterprise Nation in 2005. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, so again, interestingly, I'd sold Techlicate, and I did. So we had sold to a business called Tenon. It's now called RSM Tenon, and I had a lock-in clause with them. So I worked for that company for a year and a half. And Trevor, I'm sure you've had this on lots of your podcast interviews. Is because I'd started a business, I then quickly realized I was quite unemployable, even though I have to be careful saying that, because I'm now employed by the government. So I am an employee again. But I essentially kind of spent that time during the lock-in of definitely kind of working for Tenon, but also thinking, what is my next venture going to be? And at the time, I read a book written by a brilliant US author called Dan Pink. And he had written a book. And so, as you say, this was 2005. This is 20 years ago. So he had written a book called Free Agent Nation, and it charted the rise of people starting businesses in America. And essentially what this book questioned was, is the infrastructure in America ready for this huge boost in self-employment? And I read this book again, I'll never forget. I was in Waterstones on Deansgate in Manchester. I read this book and thought, oh my goodness, this is going to happen in the UK. People are going to start businesses. Rather than employment, they'll look at self-employment. And so we need to make sure that the nation is prepared for it. Therefore, you can see where the name came from, Free Agent Nation to Enterprise Nation. But actually, when I first started Enterprise Nation, and by this time I was a sole founder, it actually started, I don't hugely like this term, but I started it as a lifestyle business. So for the first few years, I just delivered consulting work on how areas could become more enterprising. Then I stepped out of the business to run Startup Britain. And again, this is a story you've maybe heard a lot, but in 2017, I kind of came back into Enterprise Nation and thought, I think I need to be serious about this business. I want to grow it. So at the end of that year, I took angel investment from a great entrepreneur called Sir Richard Harpin, who had started and has since sold a business called HomeServe. And what that kind of delivered for me from an Enterprise Nation perspective is accountability, because as soon as you've got an angel investor in your business, you know ultimately that they've invested because they want to see a return. And so it makes you very accountable to deliver. And so then over the next 6 years, we did scale Enterprise Nation. And so, yes, that was a business which is still, I sold the business in 2023, but it's still very much operating. And what that company exists to do is help people start and grow small businesses. And sure enough, over the past 20 years, we have seen a huge increase. So limited companies were on about 5.6 million, but of course, so many millions more of sole traders who are taking ideas and turning them into new ventures.
Could you, if we just pause for a second there and just think about Enterprise Nation itself, there to help small business networks. So you were a small business as well, but with what? Big networks? I mean, what was the structure of it, just so that the listener understands?
Yeah, so we were a fully private company, and by the time I sold the business, we had our revenue was about 50% was from big corporate partners who would partner with us. So this is brands like Vodafone, Amazon, Dell, Google, Adobe. They would come to us and say, "We'd like you to deliver a small business support program for us." So that was about half of our revenue, and then the other half was with the public sector. So the company, and again, still to this day, runs programs like the mentoring element for Help to Grow management. We delivered lots of small business support programs for local authorities. So the company itself was kind of like a small business support activation agency. But at the heart of that was this amazing community of small businesses. So, I started out, again, it goes back to the bootstrapping story. Because I was a sole founder, I just started out by essentially hosting meetups. Out of that, kind of this community started to grow. And what the business now is a very powerful platform with just under 1 million small businesses as kind of part of the community. So amazing community. And of course, out of that, and this is, I guess, kind of segue back into my sort of government world, is what we did the whole time through Enterprise Nation is hopefully represent the views of small business to government. So when small businesses kind of would say to us, "We'd like to sell more to government. We're not quite sure of tax. Can you make digital adoption easier?" We would kind of take all these ideas into Whitehall and hopefully kind of do a good job of speaking on their behalf.
Let's move forward to 2025. You become Small Business Commissioner. And suddenly, I mean, you modestly said, I'd become unemployable, but somebody did employ you. And I'm just interested in what you think they saw in you amongst the millions of small businesses sort of out there. And what did you make of the fact that you might be paid by somebody else? I mean, it's a culture shock, isn't it?
Well, so again, really interesting point. So let me answer that in two different parts. First of all, when the role came up, and you have interviewed Liz, my predecessor. So Liz had messaged me to say, "My term is ending, this role is coming up." And I had always looked at this role and thought I'd love to kind of get my hands on that because it's a very clear problem statement, which is how do we speed up money and get businesses paid on time? And I really like the singularity of that problem. But of course, when the role had previously been available, I was very busy running Enterprise Nation. So when Liz got in touch, I was like, okay, well, I've sold the business. I'd stayed on for 2 years to kind of settle in the team. So all of a sudden, I kind of was available. So I did call up the team in the department who were making the hire. And I said, "Look, I may not be the right person for this, but what are you looking for in the next commissioner?" And they said, "What we would really welcome at this particular stage as we look to hopefully take forward legislation is someone to come in and raise the profile of the office." And I guess you can kind of now sense, Trevor, kind of all of my background has, yes, been about running businesses, but has also been about campaigning and getting out there and hopefully speaking up for small firms. So that was what attracted me, is I said, okay, if that's what you're looking for, I think I have got a role to play in that. So I applied for the job. I was called to interview. And so it was an open process. And of course, I was delighted to then hear that I'd secured the role. So it's a 2-year term. And back to that point about unemployable, the thing that I love about this office, and actually what I have tried to do since coming in, and it's been just over a year now, is it's what's referred to as an arm's length body. So I inherited a small and mighty team of 14 people. We report into the Department for Business, now known as the Department for Business, Innovation, Science and Trade. So we report into that department, but we're slightly separate because we are an arm's length body. So essentially, I've come in and I've done the only thing I know how to do, which is I'm running it like a little business.
Mm.
And so, of course, pretty much our only client at the moment is the department. So our sole source of funding is the department.
Yes.
But actually, one of the really interesting things about the potential new powers is the office will potentially have revenue generating ability. And so that really interests me. So it's something that we're working on at the moment, which is could we ever get the office in a place where it reduces its reliance on taxpayer funded money? And can it actually start to generate its own revenue? So, yes, I kind of took on the role with this big focus of how do we raise the profile? How do we get really good engagement to hopefully get this legislation through Parliament? I'm very happy to update on that if it's helpful.
Mm.
But also, how can I potentially set up the office for future success based on my experience of commercializing activity? How do we set the office up so it can actually start to generate its own income?
And I'm seeing my inbox is sort of full of things from you guys in a good way, just talking about, particularly around late payments and the way you've brought together sort of major suppliers and payment platforms and so on. Could you just kind of briefly sort of just take us through what you're trying to do there? Because you've got this beefed up or soon to be beefed up sort of role. There's an excitement there, but also it's a getting right at the core issue that a lot of small businesses face. Could you just take us through that sort of payments, the platform type thing? Because you obviously have a background in sort of tech locate and so on. So maybe you know a bit more about that, that you can help to drive the change through.
Well, even though I'm still learning every day, particularly around how you take legislation through, but very, very briefly, Trevor, the kind of the size of the issue. So this was kind of my number one item when I came into role. And actually it happened at the time when government was releasing statistics on this. So late payment, £11 billion cost to the UK economy. And then the figure that really mortifies me, well, there's two figures. 38 businesses go out of business every day due to late payment. And then the one that we're kind of really focused on as our North Star metric is small business owners spend on average 86 hours chasing debt.
Mm.
And this is the one that grieves me most because I've been that small business owner who has chased for payment. And of course, we have all been there. So that's the problem that we're seeking to solve. The mission that we're on as a team is to make life easier for small businesses by getting money moving quicker through the economy. So that's the mission that we're on. Very briefly, how we kind of go about it is we have what I refer to our business as usual activity. So this is, we have a casework team that if small businesses aren't getting paid, they can call us up and say, can you get my payment back? Mm. We run something called the Fair Payment Code, which is a mark of good payment success. And we're awarding lots of businesses, large and small, onto the code. And then, as you say, we produce a lot of content for small businesses on here's how you can contract well in order to get paid on time. Mm. But over the years that this office has existed, which is since 2018, many, many stakeholders and commentators have said, well, that's all fine, but all you've got at your disposal to try and encourage prompt payment is the soft power of encouraging people to do the right thing. And essentially, kind of government looked at this and said, we just don't think it's enough. We think we need a stick to complement the carrot of what we've kind of been working on. Yeah. So this is where the legislation comes in. So it is currently going through Parliament as a bill, and it's called the Commercial Payments Bill. And of course, the huge kind of thing that this will do, and it's moving quickly through Parliament. So I keep on crossing my fingers every time I say this, but we're hopeful it might come into effect sort of at the tail end of next year. And what this will do is, if we can get it into law, is it will move the UK to a maximum 60-day payment terms. Mm. So no small businesses will ever be expected to sign contracts with longer payment terms than that. And it will also be on any late paid invoices, an automatic application of mandatory interest of 8% above the Bank of England base rate. There's some other measures around construction and kind of connected to all of this. And this is what you've referred to, more powers for the Office of the Small Business Commissioner to essentially enforce what the law is saying. So we would look to boost activity around adjudicating for small firms, so kind of protecting their interests, whilst also if we can see repeat bad offenders of large companies not paying on time, we would look to investigate them and potentially we'd be able to issue fines.
Right, because You've mentioned large companies there, and there is a stereotype and possibly a true stereotype about the big bad large companies who drag out the payment 90 days, 180 days. It's a bit more complicated than that, though, isn't it? It's not just big companies. Also, when you're on a trading platform online and maybe the money's not coming through on time, and there's a lot of skullduggery or just incompetence going on there. So it's a bit of a complicated thing. When there's more than one cause of this problem.
100%.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a big thing that I've said kind of since coming in is in a way kind of I've spent a year unraveling the layers of the onion, because you're absolutely right. There's so many different reasons why people do. And again, if you look at our casework team, so of course they hear from small businesses who haven't been paid. And quite often it is not because the large company has got bad intent and doesn't want to pay. It is exactly as you've just said. It's a process that's gone wrong. It's not having a purchase order number on an invoice. It was sent to the wrong place, and therefore it kind of all got wrapped up in the system. So as you say, and therefore what we have to do as our job, and forgive me, Trevor, because you did ask me the question about the platforms and I didn't really kind of respond to that. What we have to do is almost address each of those elements. So as I say, it's everything from content for small businesses on, even from the point of when a contract gets issued to you, look at the payment terms and conditions in the contract, because again, I've been there. As a small business, you win some work, you're over the moon that you've won the work. When the contract comes in, you just sign it because you're like, great, come on, let's get on with it. So it's even from the point where we're kind of saying small businesses, look at the terms in the contract. Certainly when the new law comes in, know your rights to be able to push back and negotiate on those terms, through to working with the platforms, because of course, we also hear from small businesses, it's not about late payment, it's about long payment, because it can take 3 months just to onboard into the SME platform that maybe your big client is using. So as you've rightly seen, a couple of weeks ago, well, last week actually, we brought together all of these big platforms to essentially say, we would love to work with you to make sure your platforms are ready for this new law to come into effect, so that your SMEs can onboard quickly, your big companies know that they've got to pay on time. If you're the platform powering that, we as government want to work with you to make sure you get that right. So yes, our job is to kind of address every element, which takes us into kind of lots of different directions. And just as a final thing on this, is kind of a new piece of work we're working on over the next couple of months, is even looking at the role that investors and private equity play. So if you're an investor, we want to talk to you around only investing in businesses that have got good payment performance. Similarly, we're running an event in FinTech Week, because we're seeing that sort of alongside the legislation coming into effect, new companies, this kind of takes us back to the dot-com era, new technology companies are launching to, sort the problem, which I'm delighted about, because I want to see government intervention. But if entrepreneurial founders can come up with new technologies that speed up payment, great. So we're hosting an event with lots of venture capital firms to say, how do we boost the amount of money going into what we're referring to as the paytech sector? So new technology solutions to kind of speed up payment times. So essentially, that's a long way round of agreeing with you that there's so many elements to late payment. If we can get all of those right, then we can kind of get to that nirvana situation of no more hours spent chasing debt, which wouldn't that be a lovely thing?
Brilliant. So if the 86 hours that you mentioned sort of went down to 30 or something, then that makes a different world, doesn't it, really? I mean, yeah.
56 hours that a small business owner can then say, actually, I could spend that time on winning another sale, hiring a person, looking at what support's available. So yes, that's the aspiration.
Okay, by the way, don't worry about not answering the question immediately. I often forget the question that I've just asked, so that's not a problem. I mean, having worked with so many entrepreneurs, I mean, what are the biggest opportunities for small businesses in the next few years? I mean, are they all driven by technology, or are there other things that we've been talking about, technology and platforms and stuff like that in the context of late payment, but beyond that, what do small businesses have to look forward to in terms of their opportunities in the next few years?
Yeah, and again, great question. And I'd love to offer probably kind of three things, actually, that if I was running a small business now, certainly that I'd be excited about. The first is very local. So I am optimistic about high street regeneration. There was a lovely piece in the press this week about the value of the experience economy, that it's growing. I wouldn't say exponentially, but the value of the experience economy is growing. So families, friends, they want to spend on traveling to new places in the UK, dining out, experiences. I think that creates great opportunity for small businesses because, of course, small businesses are close to the action. They can come up with good ideas. So I think local high street regeneration, experiential economy, I think is a great opportunity. At a kind of a whole different level, I think going global is a big opportunity for small firms in the UK. Technology has certainly enabled that to happen, that, you can have services or products built and designed in the UK, and of course you can get them everywhere, all overseas. So I do think exports still remains a big opportunity. And then the third one kind of brings us back to government, and it's another topic that I'm really passionate about, which is selling to the public sector. So a couple of years ago, a new piece of law did come into effect called the Procurement Act. And a big part of the intention of the Procurement Act was for government to buy more from SMEs. And in fact, well, I'm hoping that this Friday you'll see from my weekly LinkedIn newsletter is going to be a profile on the Ministry of Defence and all the things that they're doing to try and spend more with small firms. And that kind of activity is being replicated across other central government departments. So for small businesses who kind of say to me, what should we be looking at? I would say make sure you've got either your local engagement right and you're building your brand there, or look at international markets and kind of get that right. But definitely, whatever you sell, from gardening services to graphic design, definitely consider the government, because they buy everything and they want to buy more from small firms.
Okay, so final question now is that here you are, small business commissioner. So what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about starting or growing their own business on the basis of not just your current experience, but also all of your experience? What advice would you give someone who's just not quite sure whether to make that jump?
Well, I always rip off the Nike logo, the Nike kind of three words when it comes to this, but just do it. And I guess kind of just do it, but that kind of sounds as if it's kind of bravado and risk taking. I would always say just do it, but make sure you surround yourself with support and have a plan. So I'm a big believer in a business plan when you start a business. Continue to have a business plan as you grow that business, because it just keeps you on track. And of course, surround yourself with support. And there's so much of that available from mentors, peer networks, the Business Growth Service, which is the government support service. There's lots of it available. So I'd say just do it, but make sure you've got a plan and surround yourself with support.
Okay, just do it. We've heard it here from the Small Business Commissioner herself, Emma Jones. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Trevor, for having me on.
And that's where we left the conversation. I guess what I really liked about that final piece of advice from Emma is that it sums up much of what we heard through the conversation. There's a sort of infectious optimism from her about her entrepreneurship, although it's really grounded in the practicalities of what it takes to make a business work. And as she said, she's now applying the same principles to her current job as Small Business Commissioner. I was really, really struck by the integrity of Emma's story back from the dot-com boom days, at a time when raising large amounts of money seemed to be a measure of success in itself. She instead went back to the basics of finding customers, generating revenue, and building something a bit more sustainable. I think there's also a lovely circularity to her journey. Everyone who has ever run a successful business will know what she means when she says that sometimes she feels unemployable. But in truth, she's proven very employable, and she now has the opportunity, as Small Business Commissioner, to focus relentlessly on one of our biggest, most persistent problems, getting paid on time. I loved her optimism too about what comes next, whether that's a revival of local high streets and the experience economy, exporting things overseas, or the opportunity for businesses to win more work from government. But perhaps the most reassuring message for anyone contemplating making that sort of leap into starting your own business is that you don't have to have every answer yourself. All you need is the confidence to get moving, certainly, but also some idea of where you're heading and good people around you as you go. As she says, just do it. So thank you to Emma, and thank you to all of our listeners, and for the great feedback we're getting on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your podcast provider, whether that's Spotify, iTunes, or now we have a new YouTube channel. It's the Merri-Cast, that's all one word. And if you want to find out more about us, look for me, Trevor Meriden, or our business Merriborn at merriborn.co.uk. Well, that's about it for now. And until next time, thanks for listening.